Welcome to Casual Politics, Graham Brady. Thank you very much for accepting my request, and I'm very grateful to you. You need absolutely no introduction. You've been member of parliament since 1997, almost 18 years, a long time. And then also you are chairman of 1922 committee. But it seems that your committee has become less influential as it used to be 40 years ago. Do you agree with that?
I wasn't here 40 years ago. We can only, I suppose, deal with the experiences we have at the time. I suppose coming into Parliament at a time when we were in opposition, in quite a small opposition, you can look at the influence that a party committee might have over an opposition, but inevitably that's less significant than having influence over a government. So I think my own sense would be that having undertaken this role in a period of 5 years of coalition government from 2010 to 2015, I just want to check that that's...
No, that's absolutely fine. You could...
I'll send him a quick message. So having undertaken this role for 5 years at the time of coalition government, and now I suppose for about 5 months at a time of majority Conservative government, I think the observation that I would make is that one of the problems at a time of coalition government was that the structural arrangements in the last coalition were too closely balanced between the Conservative majority partner and the Liberal Democrat minority partner. Each part of the coalition had 2 members of the Quad, the central decision-making body. And I think that necessarily reduced the direct influence of the Conservative Party as a whole. And the 1922 Committee is the Parliamentary Conservative Party.
But under which circumstances would you consider to change your party leader when they go wrong?
Well, perhaps fortunately that's not a matter for us to do. We have a process set out in the constitution of the party which is available to all Conservative members of Parliament to trigger a confidence vote in any leader of the Conservative Party. It takes 15% of the parliamentary party at any given time to write to the chairman of the 1922 committee requesting a confidence vote be held. If that were to happen, the chairman of the 1922 committee has no discretion in the matter. The confidence vote has to be arranged as quickly as is reasonably possible, and then it's a simple democratic process.
But if David Cameron, over the EU referendum, he doesn't allow a free vote within his cabinet, do you think will that facilitate the process of changing the leader?
I don't think the two things are directly connected. The Prime Minister has indicated that he doesn't intend to continue as leader of the Conservative Party beyond the end of this Parliament. We have to assume, therefore, there will be a leadership election at some point, but I don't think that's directly connected to the referendum process, and certainly not to the question of how collective responsibility is or isn't enforced during the referendum. My views on that are clear and well known. I think it's essential that members of the front bench should be free to express their own views and preferences on the question of Britain's membership of the European Union at the time of the referendum. I think that's true for a number of reasons. I think it's the right thing to do because of the magnitude of the choice that needs to be taken. But I think it's also essential from the point of view of party management. If you're going to have, as we would all hope in the Conservative Party, a rebuilding of unity after what is necessarily going to be a fairly sort of lively debate, I think you need to reduce the temperature a little bit, and I think allowing that free vote and free expression across the party is an essential part of that.
A while ago you wrote an article in the Times, I think that it was in the Times, which you said that whatever the results of the EU referendum may be, but the party should be united. But don't you think that the referendum will split your party as it did the Labour Party in 1975?
I think that is the important challenge for us, is to make sure that it doesn't happen in a damaging way. So far, I think we're off to a very good start. We've had a fairly lengthy period now in which the question of renegotiation has been a live question. We've had lots of discussion within the party. We're seeing the groups to campaign for in or out forming as well. I think with a referendum to make the decision, it's entirely possible to maintain a sensible, civilised debate, which will facilitate a more constructive outcome and facilitate that coming together again after the referendum. Of course, there are lots of opportunities to get that wrong. So far, I think we're doing quite well. It was a very sensible move to have the decision that the Conservative Party itself will not be a participant in the referendum process. I think having decided that, it removes another cause of potential conflict of party members, membership money, donors, contributions, data that's been collected by tens of thousands of Conservative Party members campaigning up and down the country, being used for a purpose that it had never been intended for. I think that is a very good, clear signal of a sensible intention to work together in a respectful and cohesive way.
And how optimistic are you about David Cameron's renegotiations?
It's very hard to know so far. We've been told that next month there will be at least broad outlines of what is being requested that will be presented to the Commission, and will obviously be public at that point in the United Kingdom as well, available not just to members of Parliament but to everybody. I think at that point it will be obviously much easier to tell what is being asked for, and I guess it is unlikely that the government will secure bigger changes than it's requesting.
And before, your party was only divided on the issue of Europe, but now it seems that it's also divided on the issue on the welfare. Do you agree on that?
I think it's, in many ways, I think it's an unfortunate approach to politics that always looks at party division. And, you know, I hesitate to sound too Corbyn-like in this, but you know, I think that there has been a fairly big change in the mood of the public as it looks at politics. At least until recently, British politics has been less obviously divided on ideological lines than perhaps was the case 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I think the public is often more inclined now to see a more genuine debate, to expect more of parliamentary representatives, which includes sometimes speaking out on issues that we care about, which aren't necessarily always the party line. And you know, I would just reflect, I think, having watched over the years the number of times that there is a proper debate, not just across the House between parties, but very often within parties as well. I don't think the world doesn't come to an end, the sky doesn't fall. And again, I think if we can move more to a parliament in which members of parliament feel able to debate, but to do so in a way which is respectful of the views of others, the more we will be fulfilling the expectations, or the hopes at least, of our constituents.
One of your newly elected MPs, Heidi Allen, in her very inspiring maiden speech, she said that the Chancellor's budget will make millions of working class people worse off. And Andrew Mitchell as well, he said that the Chancellor should make tweaks to his budget. So are you on their side or the Chancellor's side?
Well, I'm on the side of all my colleagues. I don't know, that's the privilege of being chairman of the Legislative Committee. But I think these are difficult things to get right. there's nothing, well, there are very few things easier, I suspect, than being in government at a time when there is no deficit, when borrowing is falling, when tax revenues are constantly rising, and the choices are just about how you increase spending on things. We don't have the privilege of those times, so I think the thrust of policy in terms of the need to contain the deficit and eliminate it, and then in the fullness of time start to reduce borrowing, is a necessary step. We need to get the public finances back in a sustainable shape. A part of that, of course, is about controlling expenditure, and a part of that is about controlling welfare expenditure. And I think what the Chancellor has tried to do in his package of measures is something that pretty much all of us, if not all of us, would support on the Conservative benches, in that it is an attempt to move away from a world where welfare was available to and almost expected by an enormous percentage of the population. Going back a few years, people even earning as much as £60,000 a year could benefit from tax credits. It was an enormous expansion of the welfare state to people at a level of income that nobody had ever intended the welfare state to help. And I think it's right to unwind from that point. It's right to reduce the role of tax credits. It's a good thing if we can get wages rising, as they are at the moment, and reduce the amount that we take off people, especially at the lower end of the income scale, in tax. And then there are other measures like the reduction in social rents, like the increase in childcare, which is being funded. So I do think we need to look at the package as a whole, and it's very difficult at the moment to see how that will affect people. It's also something which is a dynamic picture, because you do get people changing their behaviour. As long as we have a relatively buoyant economy and a fairly tight labour market, a lot of people can increase the hours that they work. They can increase, therefore, their income, as well as seeing their hourly rate going up over time as well. So I think we need to be vigilant to make sure that people who can't do anything about their circumstances are looked after. But I think the thrust of the policy is clearly right.
As you said, we're still facing crisis as a nation, but don't you think that the government should give security to millions of working class people, and that security may not be occurred by taking off those working class people more than we actually give them?
Well, the best security for working class people is work, and the best security is to be able to earn your own money. And,
but if they work, but see they can't put food on the table, what
but the poorest people in the working tax credit system are being protected, because that's the way the tax credits are constructed. What you need to look at it, though, is some people who may be losing a significant element of their income and may find it difficult to make that up. So I think we should be vigilant about that. But it's very difficult at the moment to see what the exact shape is of who will be affected and how.
And are you supporting Frank Field's amendment?
Frank Field's a good friend, and I have enormous respect for him, but I don't necessarily always support the amendments that he tables in the House of Commons.
So why you will not support his new amendment on the welfare?
Because I don't think that it addresses the problem that we have discussed, and it doesn't address the issue that I've described. It isn't. I think Frank's amendment refers to the poorest people, and I don't think the problem here is the poorest people. I think the problem, if it develops as such, is a situation for those people who can't increase their working hours.
But do you think that this crisis that the government is facing, it's the government's poll tax that Thatcher's government faced in 1990? Is it similar to that crisis?
No, I don't think it is. I think that I wasn't involved in politics in Parliament at the time, but I remember it very vividly. And I think there were numerous problems with the way in which that policy had been introduced, and I suspect that had it been introduced with the removal of education spending from local level, I think maybe the levels of tax would have been such that it could have been introduced without so many difficulties as occurred. But I think the circumstances that we're facing are really dramatically different. And I think most people in the country understand that we have got to make some very significant adjustments in the public finances to arrive at a sustainable state. And we all know that in modern economies there are cycles. There are times when crises occur and when there are external shocks which present, and they don't come at predictable times. And I think it is responsible for this government to seek to put the public finances in a more durable state so that we are better prepared to face whatever problems may come in the future than we have been in the recent past.
So would you agree to Andrew Mitchell that the Chancellor should make tweaks to his budget?
Well, I've been very clear in what I've said, that I think we should be vigilant to make sure that people who can't make any
But what
changes
does
in
that
their
mean, to be
circumstances.
vigilant?
It means that we have to look at what actually happens in the implementation of a policy, the thrust of which is clearly right.
And if the party is split, what should the Prime Minister do to unite his party over the welfare?
I don't think the party is split. I think there is a very, very strong commitment to making the changes in the levels of public expenditure which will allow government to be sustainable, will allow the public finances to return to sanity and to a position where they are able to face future difficulties. That's something we're all united on. I think the party is also very broadly united around the approach which seeks to move people away from welfare and into work, into the greater ability to provide for and support themselves and their families.
How will this issue affect the government for the next elections that you will have next May, the Welsh Assembly election, the Scottish Assembly election and the London mayoral election?
Well, many things can affect elections, especially elections that occur mid-term. I think most of us who came through the general election this year would always be cautious about making predictions about what will happen at elections in the future.
And you've been an advocate of building more grammar schools across the country. So for you to hear the news that the government approved a new grammar school in Kent, was it a good news?
Yes, it was good news. It was a modest but welcome step. It will help a relatively small number of children and families in one part of Kent where they didn't have a grammar school and where children still are having to get on buses to travel 9 miles to the nearest grammar school that can provide for them. So, clearly welcome, and it's a positive step. My argument, though, is much more fundamental than that, and really is that I think that people should be able to have the kind of schools that they want. I don't think in this day and age it's right for the man in Whitehall or politicians in Westminster to dictate to parents or to local communities that there are certain types of school which are acceptable and certain types of school which aren't acceptable. And we have in my part of the world, in Greater Manchester and Trafford, we've got probably the best state education anywhere in the country. Outstanding grammar and high schools. We've got similar success in the selective schools in various parts of the country. But there are great swathes where, however much people want to have that kind of education available, unless they can afford to pay for it by taking their children into private independent education, they can't have it. So I really would like to see government taking a step back and seeing itself more as a facilitator of the kind of education that people want than seeing its role as dictating the kind of education they're allowed to have.
And do you think that if the government builds more grammar schools, that will increase social mobility in this country?
Yes.
And where is the evidence?
Well, I think in many ways, I mean, the trouble with education policy is that everybody has their own experiences of it, and there is an endless stream of anecdote. Therefore, so I can give the evidence, which is my own experience. but I can look at countless tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and certainly look at the experience of a massive expansion of social mobility in our country in the post-war years after the 1944 Education Act. The people who were driven through some of our best universities from very modest backgrounds, both through state grammar schools and through the direct grant scheme applying to magnificent schools like Manchester Grammar School, which now has to charge fees to many bright boys in Manchester who 40 years ago would have had their education provided free of charge because it was part of the direct grant scheme. So I think there is masses of evidence that that kind of availability of that kind of education can drive social mobility. The argument that always comes from critics is about the numbers and percentages of people from poorer backgrounds in existing grammar schools. But it always strikes me as grossly unfair that you have those who campaigned against selective education, who have over decades driven grammar schools into small corners where they become more selective. They're very often, not exclusively, but very often in relatively affluent areas as well. And if you really want to get those levels of participation in state grammar schools from poorer families up, then I think it's fairly obvious. Let people have a grammar school in Moss Side in Manchester, let them have a grammar school in Hackney or in Tower Hamlets in London. And I think you will start to see far more people from deprived backgrounds getting that kind of education and getting the opportunities that it can give.
And my last two questions. Very recently, the government has given a royal welcome to the president of China, as it had done before with the Saudi officials when they were coming to this country. So, do you think that if you look if you look and see that these countries have a very poor record in terms of human rights, do you think that actually the government values money even before humanity?
No, I don't.
No?
I think it's an elegantly phrased question. I think that there is a really important decision always to be taken in these things, that it is by engagement and involvement that you change societies. I think that that if we were to take the decision to walk away from talking to regimes, whether it be Saudi Arabia or China, I don't think that leads to a more open, more outward-looking Saudi Arabia or China. I think engagement, which involves investment and business in both directions, but also involves the kind of proper, robust dialogue explaining what flaws we see. And of course, the Chinese are perfectly capable of telling us they see flaws in our society as well. But we should have that kind of robust exchange. And I think that some of the strengths that we have in Britain, the British economy, and across the West, are actually things that lie in the strength of the rule of law and the confidence that people have in that, the strength of whatever our flaws, durable, established democratic institutions, and the political stability that comes with that. So, I think it's right that we engage with the Chinese, it's right that we trade with the Chinese, but I think it's also one of the helpful messages that can come from British governments and from British businesses, is that it is in the interests of Chinese governments as well as the Chinese people to move progressively in the direction of better underpinning of human rights and steps towards a more predictable rule of law and the environment in which businesses can feel the maximum confidence. And that's how we build prosperous societies.
But you said that involvement and engagement are very important to open dialogue. So will you agree to welcome some members of ISIS and to give them a royal welcome and to to invite them at a banquet to Buckingham Palace because you're in favour, you're very keen to engage.
No, I wouldn't. But I think that there are obvious differences between recognised, legitimate sovereign governments and others. There is a spectrum in these things. Clearly, for Iran for many years was seen as a country that Western countries couldn't do business with, diplomatically or in commercial sense. Now there is just the beginning of a thaw, a beginning of a dialogue. I think these probably are the very hardest choices and decisions, the moment at which it is acceptable to start talking to people or to organisations that have fallen well below the standards expected. And clearly we have some experience of this in our own country in moving towards peace in Northern Ireland. Still, it's a very long bell.
And then another last question.
Clearly we have some experience of this in our own country as we move towards peace in Northern Ireland. Still not work that's been completed, but a much more peaceful scenario than there was when I was a boy. And that has been achieved through some very difficult decisions, unpalatable in many cases, for people to begin talking and begin dealing with each other. And the remarkable scene of many of us recall of seeing Ian Paisley working with Martin McInnes was I suppose something that we would never have thought we would have seen in life. So these are profoundly difficult choices, often not welcome choices. But it's those difficult decisions that make government challenging. And
so we should talk to terrorists, as you suggest.
No, and I suppose what I say, I've always found it very difficult to countenance those moves. But I think that a degree of humility is also appropriate. Those of us who would have found it very difficult to begin that dialogue that led to the Northern Irish peace process, especially I think those of us who don't live in Northern Ireland, have to be prepared to acknowledge that people who have been far more directly affected by that terrible terrorist violence, many cases personally affected, personally injured, certainly threatened. I think if they had been able to bring themselves to work together, then distasteful as I may have found the prospect, I also then have to look at the benefits that might come from that sort of process.
And my last question, what do you make of Michael Ashcroft's new book on David Cameron, Call Me Dave?
I haven't read it.
Have you received it?
I haven't received it. But I think, obviously Michael Ashcroft has been very ill, which many of us didn't realise until recently. His co-author, Isabel Oakeshott, has spoken for the authors about the nature of the work and the way they sought to present something which they didn't intend to present necessarily as a record, but rather as a statement of what people have said to them, and people can draw their own conclusions about that. I would also say Michael Ashcroft is somebody who has been a very considerable supporter of the Conservative Party, not just with his money, but also with his time and his energy, and an enormous amount of support. A lot of my colleagues who won marginal seats in the general election in 2010 in particular. So, you know, I always try to make sure we don't fall out with people, and try to remember we are all on the same side.
And do you believe that pig story, which is in the book? Or
I think the Prime Minister has made it very clear he's not.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you.